Over the last 10 years, our family's been through the complete cycle of aged care, with my parents both going to aged care, being there for different periods of time. My father was there for a lot longer than my mother, and then finally them both passing on. I describe it as pretty traumatic at the start, settling down to being a good quality of life, and then becoming more traumatic at the end of each of my parents' journeys. It's a terrible situation when someone's been in the house, as my parents were, for 64 years. And my father and my grandfather actually built that house. So leaving that was horrific from their point of view. Massive resistance about going into care. And you can really understand that. But there's a trade-off between their safety and their health and staying in the house versus leaving that life and moving off to a new life in an institution environment. I've seen cases in this practice where it's caused massive emotional stress and friction and fights between various members of the family on whether a particular mum or dad stays in the house or actually goes into care. I've actually seen it break down family dynamics. They avoided it for as long as you possibly could, and then they had a medical event which gave them no choice. My father was my mother's carer, and he had a very serious medical event. So I ended up with both parents in hospital at the same time, unable to return to the house and nowhere to go. So that absolutely puts you in crisis mode. So while they were in hospital, we had to race around and try to find a nursing home that was reasonably geographically to where I lived. And I found great difficulty in trying to work out on what basis do you assess it. Do you assess it on the basis of how it looks, how clean it is, its aesthetics? Do you look at it at the activities they provide for people? Do you make a judgment based on the care plans and the clinical assistance you get? And it's very difficult. It's not easy unless you've had some experience to make a value judgment. And then you've got the complexity of the bonds. And the bonds aren't necessarily proportionate to the facility that's being provided. So you've got to make a value judgment there as you're getting value for money. It's extremely difficult, from personal experience, to get two people in a home in crisis mode within a very short period of time. Well, it's pretty typical, but most people flourish. Everything's done for them. The stress goes out of their life. They get proper nourishment. They get activities, that engagement with other people that they probably never had when they're in their own home. So it really is pretty typical that people flourish for that period of time whilst they're in good health in that home. Well, unfortunately what happened is my mother's health deteriorated and she had to move to a high care facility. So she was separated from my father for the first time in their entire married life of 65 years. It's a very difficult thing, but she was quite ill and there was absolutely no choice. She had to go into that high care facility, which is a completely different approach to care. It's very clinical, very hospital based, and really focused on preventing people from falls. And there's a huge element of safety compared to a more independent living style in a low care facility. For a period of time, he coped really well until his health deteriorated. And by then, the rules and legislation around high care and low care has changed. And we now have a concept called ageing in place, where low care facilities provide, in inverted commas, high care facilities right through to palliative care, but they do it in a low care environment. So there's a trade-off between, it was a trade-off with me, with shifting my father from a comfortable, pleasant, homely type of low care facility with ageing in place, where they were trying to provide high care treatments, or taking him out of that environment and putting him into a very clinically based high care facility, which is pretty confronting, where you would get probably a better quality of high care. And that's the sort of trade-off that you get. What we decided to do was to leave him in the low care facility because he was comfortable. He'd been there for 9 years. It was his new home. And taking him out of that at that stage of his life, we didn't think was actually fair. Well, the three things, and I think they're absolutely critical. The first thing is to get family engagement on what should happen and start that process early, particularly if there's a number of children involved in that family, because inevitably there'll be differences of opinion. The parents won't want to leave. Some of the kids will want to make sure that the parents are looked after with great care and they're completely safe. Other people will have the view that you're taking them out of their home, they don't want to go, they're coping okay. It's very important. It takes a long time to get everybody on the same page with the same attitudes to what should happen. So in my view, the first thing is to start the conversations early. They're unpleasant, they're emotive, but they've got to be done because it's just part of the journey. The second thing is that you've got to make sure that you've got the paperwork in place. You absolutely need to have powers of attorney, enduring powers of attorney, because if there is a loss of testamentary capability or mental capacity caused by accident, stroke, illness, you're in all sorts of strife. You've got to go off to VCAT, and that's a very expensive and unpleasant experience. And you've also got to make sure that you've got that guardianship power, because that's the care. And if you want to make sure that you can negotiate the care of your parents, it's important that you've got that guardianship. And you need a will, because if you want to get your bond back, you're going to have to get probate, and you absolutely need to have all that paperwork in place. And the third, and probably the most important thing, is just make sure that you get quality advice. Get quality advice from someone that's experienced in the area. It's a confronting area, it's an emotive area. The financial disaster's around the corner if you do it incorrectly. You get one shot at it. If you make mistakes, it's emotionally, personally traumatic on everyone in the family. So make sure that you get that quality advice and start the process early.